introduce yourself more to you. But so Lulu and I we had a brief Zoom call. So just a reminder, anybody who goes to the requesting to share, you're going to be X'd out. You can IM me questions and I will ask them of Lulu, but we're going to record this, so we want to keep this anonymous. But we had a brief opportunity to meet on Zoom, and she'd been out for a run. I had been out for a run not that long ago, didn't have makeup on and all of that type of thing. So I was like, oh, kindred spirits and things like that. But I was reading your bio, and when I'm reading this, and and you're talking about how using food to soothe, and how the eating patterns, and I thought none of us get here by accident, and really the healing journey is about mind, body, and spirit. So I'm so thrilled you're here to talk about nutrition to fight cravings and just what nutrition and recovery is. So without further ado, I'm going to undo my audio and let you present. So follow along on the Nutrition to Fight Cravings link if you would like to see the slide.
Okay, and over to me. Great. Well, hello everyone. I'm so excited to be here this morning in Australia, today, this evening for many of you in America, North America. So excited to be here with you talking about a topic that I think touches every one of us, and that is how do we eat and nurture and nourish ourselves in a way that's going to help us keep our cravings muted and under control. So those of us in the recovery community have a lot of experience to draw on with how to manage cravings in a healthy way, and bringing our food and nutrition into that can really help strengthen our game and help us ensure we have a recovery that feels happy, healthy, and high energy. So I'm Lulu Cook. I am a dietitian credentialed in Australia and America. I'm a counselor, the author of an anti-inflammatory cookbook, and just an all-around food geek. Tammy gave you some of the technical details about this special summit meeting that we're doing. I'm here really to share some actionable skills and strategies to reduce cravings. And we'll focus quite a bit on alcohol and sugar. There's just so much overlap there in terms of that cross addiction, and being able to make some positive changes on both fronts that are going to ripple out in so many ways. So I do this because nutrition has made such a huge difference in my own recovery. I've been in the rooms for 20 years and really continue to appreciate the power of food to really act as medicine. We'll start with just defining our terms. What are cravings even? We'll look at the link between what we eat and what happens in our heads, like where do those cravings come from, and look at some ways to set you up for success, because we just want to feel great in our recovery. So what are cravings? And again, as Tammy mentioned, you can follow along on the slide deck if you'd like, using that link above. So I'll be looking down and referring to my slides as well. There have been approximately 10,000 studies on craving in the past 50 years. Most of those studies have been in the context of substances. And the field of research around craving in the realms of food addiction or sugar addiction, that compulsive eating, that's a newer set of research. But 10,000 studies on what's happening when we're gripped by craving. Wow. One sort of research definition we could use is that craving is the personal experience of wanting to use a substance or behavior to change how we feel. Yeah? Don't like how I feel right now. I think I'll feel a little better if I have some of XYZ, fill in the blank. So this is a hope to achieve a euphoric or a pleasant effect. And then, of course, as addiction goes on, many of us are familiar with the fact that we end up looking to that substance we're craving or that behavior we're craving just to avoid feeling bad, to avoid that withdrawal. And that can certainly happen with sugar and high-fat, high-sugar foods, just as well as it can with more recognized substances of addiction. So in plain terms, craving is, I need it, I want it, I can't function without it, I have to get it. So hopefully that will ring some bells, but not too many bells, not too recent bells, because I know we're in a great room of recovery here, and we're all at different points in our journey. Something I've found many people experience is that we come into the rooms and we might be able to put down some of the more classic substances. We can just not pick up that bottle one day at a time. We can quit with having to call our dealer and just get clean and sober and maybe have some success on that front. And then find ourselves, years down the line or months down the line, whatever it may be, clean and sober, but really struggling with not feeling good and feeling like there's something else that's crept in that I feel like I have to have every day to feel okay. And that can kind of sneak up on us, and that, for many of us, that's going to be the sugar and the high-fat foods. In the research world, those are referred to as ultra-palatable foods or hyper-palatable foods, typically highly processed and, really research developed to hook us in as consumers and keep us wanting more and keep us spending more. So what do we crave? Again, we crave substances and behaviors that are going to change how we feel. Alcohol, drugs, food, sex, gambling, running. It can be this broad range of things. And what's happening is happening on a biochemical and neurological and psychological level just as much as on the physical level. Typically, we are not craving those cookies because we're hungry. Maybe every now and then it might be that we're actually hungry at that point, but more often than that, the craving is not coming from an actual physiological hunger perspective. So where is it coming from? Well, let's get primal here. We could look at evolution and start to get a real hint about where that craving comes from. We are born as human animals with a natural and necessary preference for sweet, high-fat foods. That would be breast milk. That is mother's milk, the first substance that the human animal would historically have consumed, and many of us, that would have been our first meal. And human breast milk is very high fat, it's very sweet, and of course, as a newborn, very comforting. We're being held. We're being held by the mother and enjoying this delicious, sweet, high-fat food. And that is necessary for us to survive, and enjoying that and relishing it and feeling satisfied and comforted by that high-fat, high-sugar milk, along with the holding and the touch and the connection necessary for our survival, right? And we see that what's happening there is really happening at a primal level. Some signals are happening in the hypothalamus. That's the really ancient part of the brain, letting us know that we're safe, that we are going to survive. And some of those older brain signals can then travel, excuse me, particularly as we get older and our brain capacity actually develops, that signaling that, these kinds of foods make me feel safe and warm and comforted, and like I'm going to survive another day. That signaling can travel from the back of the brain forward to the prefrontal cortex, the more executive part of the brain, the more decision-making part of the brain, the control center of the brain. And that's where we start to have more capacity to really go out there and get the snacks we want, to be able to recreate that feeling of comfort and safety. So we see that with emotional eating. There is that really understandable and natural link with why certain foods could create a psychological and emotional experience of feeling good and feeling comfortable. And some of this, it doesn't necessarily matter. It's such old wiring in our human brains. It doesn't necessarily matter if we had that experience as newborns or not. Some of us weren't breastfed. That's totally okay. We've made it to this room today, so we all survived. But just that wiring that tells us on some really deep primal level that these high-fat, high-sweet foods are good. We all have that wiring. So going from just the evolutionary side of it, which can really help normalize, I think, some of our experiences experiences of craving, we can see that there's also a neurobiological effect. That means that the substances that we consume, whether that might be alcohol, whether that might be, sorry to pick on cookies, who doesn't love a good cookie, but whether it's, alcohol or cookies, those substances that we consume can release certain hormones and chemicals in our brain, in our gut, and that can drive that craving cycle. And we see in a pretty abundant body of research now that drugs, alcohol, and sugar all can ping some of the same neural pathways, the same kind of grooves in our brain that would tell us, I have to have another drink. Like I need one, and I need one before I go to work because I'm a little shaky and I need that drink, right? That kind of deep grooved craving pattern in the brain can just be flipped over the littlest bit, and our preference and desire for sugar can travel down that same path that's already been kind of cleared in the forest of our brain. So when we give up the substances that might have brought us to these rooms, it's too easy for sugar to slide in and take that same place because we've already got the pathway cleared in our brain to just plop something new in there. And why not those hyper satisfying, high fat, high carb kind of foods? And on the emotional side, so many of us see this. We're sheltering in place. The world feels scary. We're concerned about our health and the health of our loved ones right now. Some of us are really maybe facing some really uncertain and challenging times financially. We've got a lot of those alarm bells going off way back in our ancient brain going, scary, scary, not safe. It's a scary world out there. That's just the truth of where we are globally right now. We're all experiencing that on some level, even if COVID isn't touching us particularly personally. That global fear signaling is alive for all of us. So that ancient part of our brain is scared right now, and we're too happy then to turn toward things that feel comforting, things that feel safe, things that evoke that feeling of protection and safety. And so for many of us, that's going to include our food choices right now. We know rates of alcohol use are skyrocketing worldwide as people shelter in place. The alcohol companies are certainly not suffering financially at this time. Their profits are going through the roof. So we're drinking more, many of us, and we're eating, we hear these memes now about like stress baking and emotional baking. Almost nobody's going out and emotionally eating too much broccoli. Broccoli is very healthy for us, but it just doesn't do the same thing for our brain that those fresh baked cookies or our other treats, chips, high fat, high carb potato chips or crisps. Those do something different for us on the brain level than broccoli does. The good news is that there hasn't been a lot of research out yet because shelter in place is new, but there has been one study on COVID weight gain, and it was a big data set, something, I think it was, I want to say 400,000 people. I'm not sure. I can check that later if anybody's really curious to know. You can ping Tammy a question about that. But it's a big data set looking at weight gain thus far with sheltering in place, and it had only been around a pound. Many of us as adults don't necessarily have the room to add even 1 extra pound. It's going to be harder to take it off later than it is to put it on now. But the quarantine 15 for many of us is perhaps an exaggeration, and I would argue here not something that we need to get too fixated on. Every one of our bodies will respond differently. Some of us may gain some weight. Some of us might be so stressed out we're not eating, right? So the picture will be different for everyone, and we all have the same possibility and power to be making some healthy choices to try to stay in that happy, healthy weight range for us. When we consume the alcohol and the sugar particularly, we get a lot of activity happening with our neurotransmitters, our hormones, and what's called the hedonic regions of the brain. These are the parts of the brain that signal reward and pleasure. So that is very reinforcing. Our dopamine goes up, and dopamine sometimes gets called a pleasure hormone. It's not. It actually drives reward and motivation before the pleasurable reward happens. So if I take a drug that creates a real sense of euphoria, the dopamine is the hormone that gets released that tells me that was good, you should go get more of it. And then the next day, maybe I could feel that dopamine surge really egging me on to go get more of that substance. It's not actually going to give me the high itself. It's what drives me and motivates me to go out and get what I got to get to be able to change how I feel. So dopamine is definitely in play with the sugar, just as much as with alcohol and other drugs of addiction. We also see ghrelin. That's a hormone that is related with hunger. It drives a sense of hunger, and it specifically drives a preference for, guess what? High fat, high sweet foods. And our serotonin is involved here as well. And certainly for those of us in early recovery from substances and alcohol, our serotonin levels will be wildly dysregulated, and that can go on for some time. That really is one of our kind of happy hormones, and putting that in quotes here. The serotonin is one of the happy hormones, and when our levels are low of serotonin, that can drive cravings for carbs. And then when we do eat something sweet, we do get a rise in our serotonin, and we feel calm, we feel better. We have changed how we feel with that tub of ice cream. And an interesting link there on the serotonin, and we're not going to talk too much about gut health on this particular hour, but the serotonin, approximately 80 to 90% of the serotonin circulating in our body is made in the gut. And so if we have poor gut health, our serotonin will be impaired. We might have low serotonin. And certainly if we're in the early stages of our substance recovery, having poor gut health is so common. And then it's pretty common for those of us even who have been clean and sober for a long time. We can really suffer with some gut health. And so if our gut health is suffering and we have inadequate serotonin production coming out of that gut, we don't feel as good as we could. We are more likely to be depressed. We're likely to not feel great, and to have lower immunity and just all kinds of problems with the gut health. But so interesting connection there with how that gut health can really help drive the cravings. Let's see. I get excited and I just get going. So some of the other interesting links between the alcohol and the sugar are we see that craving, tolerance, withdrawal, all of this is equally potential with sugar foods and high fat, high sugar foods as it is with alcohol. That's where the bulk of the research is, probably similar to other drugs, but we can have the same craving. We can build up the tolerance level, meaning that we need more and more of it. Some of us might remember that from our drinking days. We need more to get the same buzz, right? That can happen with this food addiction cycle as well. We can have withdrawal from sugar if we decide to go off it and go cold turkey, and that's going to link back to gut health, and we will talk about that a bit more in a minute. But we can have the withdrawal from sugar just as well as we could from substances, creating a real physical and psychological sense of uneasiness that's going to drive us right back to that sweet, sweet, sweet substance to try to feel better, get that serotonin boost again. And we can
I'm going to take a quick second. We've had a number of people that join. I want to just clarify, if you have questions, feel free to IM them to me. And when Lulu is done with the presentation, we'll be answering those. We are not going to have people in the request to share, so you'll see me clicking people out of there. So just ask your questions via IM to me. Lulu will answer them at the end of the presentation. Thank you. I'll turn it back over.
Thanks for that, Tammy. And, welcome to all of you who have just joined us, and ton of info here. So if you missed any of it, hopefully you can catch up on the recorded video later. So, or you can always send me a note later as well. So just to kind of close the loop on how hardwired that craving is, we also see what's called cross-sensitization between sugar and narcotics in some people. And what that means is that if we've already developed an addiction to one of those, we're more susceptible to having similar responses to the other. So that's a link that the science has drawn between sugar and opiates. So are alcoholics and addicts uniquely at risk around this potential for cravings to get out of control and blossom into potentially compulsive overeating or what we could call sugar addiction or food addiction? Absolutely. We are at potentially elevated risk. And so now we're looking at a little bit more of the biology. Yeah, we talked about the evolutionary aspect and the neuroscience aspect, and now we're looking at the genetic aspect here a little bit. And we see that the sugar and the alcohol and the drugs, they can release these euphoric endorphins. You know, those are those chemicals in the body. We talk about endorphins from a runner's high perspective, but we might also get them from the sugar and alcohol and drugs. And we see that alcohol and drug dependent people will have a higher likelihood of preferring sweets more. And just really a bulk of research showing that if you look at a room full of people and you test their preference for a sweet beverage solution versus an unsweetened beverage solution, there will be a little bit of a crossover there, or a lot of bit of a crossover there, with the people preferring the sweet solutions being more likely to either have that history of alcohol misuse or to go on and develop it in the future. We see biological children of alcoholic parents, especially alcoholic fathers. The biological children of alcoholic fathers are at a greater risk of having that sweet preference. And of course, also at higher risk with that family strain of alcoholism, higher risk of going on to have some problem drinking in their lives as well. So that really looks to have a genetic piece to it. And we have identified specific genes that are linked with that sweet preference in both alcohol and drug addicts, and as well as bulimia and obesity. So we see some genetic similarities there. And of course, this is really early days with the genetic data. Anyone who tries to tell you that they could look at your genes and tell you something amazing about what you should or shouldn't be eating, I might suggest saving your money at this point. The research is too new on that. What I can tell you is eat less sugar and eat more vegetables. That's going to be true for all of us. And we can wait a while longer while they tease out a little bit more clarity on how to make meaningful use of the genetic kind of information that's starting to come forward. And we're a little bit better at looking at the big data sets, the huge groups of people, and making these links, as opposed to being able to look at one individual and say anything meaningful. Most of us here in this room already know it if we have that predisposition to problem drinking or problem cookie-ing. We already know it. We don't need the genetic test to tell us that. And I just want to touch on one other thing that I think, in my opinion, puts us in recovery, puts us at unique risk in regards that sugar addiction or food addiction situation. And that's that we have some cultural norms around food intake and preferences. We have certainly in early recovery, sometimes it can be like pick your battles. I know that I'm getting up, 4 times over the course of one 12-step meeting to go over to the tea station and grab more of the cookies and biscuits that are there. Maybe that's a little out of hand, but I didn't pick up my drug of choice today. And that's got to be priority number 1. So that may be the case, for sure. Getting that sobriety and abstinence stable is going to be priority number 1 for many of us. But that norm of relying on the sugar and fat foods to kind of bridge us over those uncomfortable early days. Once we get in that habit, it can be hard to break it. And we see the line in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. This is the line that drives me nuts the most. dietitian here, right? Food is medicine. Believe that in my heart. This is my least favorite line in the big book. It says, quote, "One of the many doctors who had the opportunity of reading this book in manuscript form told us that the use of sweets was often helpful. He thought all alcoholics should constantly have chocolate available for its quick energy value at times of fatigue. Many of us have noticed a tendency to eat sweets and have found this practice beneficial." Close quote. Make me tear my hair out. No, no. Understandable if we do it. We've talked about all the reasons why we might be tempted to go for the chocolates in that way, but honestly, let's reset the cultural norms, because if we're making different food choices, we're actually going to feel much better at a much deeper level than that quick hit of just turning for the sugar. Before we move into looking at some of our action steps, what we want to do differently, I want to touch a little bit more on the gut, brain, liver axis, that connection between the gut and the brain. There is a two-way communication system. It's called the vagus nerve. It goes from the back of the brain down into the gut, and information is constantly being sent from the gut, from whatever we've consumed and how that's being metabolized and digested. That information is sent up to the brain, and likewise information from the brain gets sent down to the gut. This is why if we have a big, let's say we have a big work presentation coming up or a big conversation with a loved one and we're feeling worried and nervous about it, we could get those butterflies in the stomach or feel a little bit nauseated. That's because of that communication through the vagus nerve and that gut-brain connection. And in the context of cravings, what we see is that the particular species of bacteria that we have in our gut, you could think of your gut as being a neighborhood with just trillions of different kinds of bacteria and fungi and yeast in it. And looking at those gut bugs, there's different populations, kind of like different gangs wandering around in the neighborhood of our gut. And we can have a sort of neighborhood on the wrong side of the tracks, the kind of neighborhoods I used to live in when I was in my active use. And we could have like way too many big gangs of like bad guy gut bacteria wandering around creating havoc. On the other hand, maybe our gut is like really well attended to, really healthy. It's just a nice neighborhood. There's gangs of like welcome wagon gut bugs wandering around, trying to be helpful, trying to do good things. Yeah? So we've got these different populations, these different groups of gut bugs in there. And when that gets out of balance, when we get too many of the bad guys wandering around in our gut, they can actually drive our cravings, because the populations that we get more of are the ones that we're feeding more of. They all eat different foods, preferentially. All these different types of bacteria are going to thrive on different kinds of foods. So if we've been having a less balanced, more high fat, more high sugar diet, those are the kinds of gut bugs we're feeding, and those populations are going to get stronger. So what happens then when we decide to do a 30-day sugar detox? Great idea. I'm getting off all the sugar. I'm eating clean. Yeah? So we're on board. We think that's a wonderful idea for ourselves and our health. However, nobody gave that message to our gut bugs. And we've got this overblown population of bacteria who preferentially thrive on those high sugar foods. So when we go cold turkey off the sugar, the gut bugs start to starve. They freak out. They're like, where is the cookies? Where are the crisps? Like, I'm starving here. And so those gut bugs can actually release chemicals into our system that then travel up to our brain and drive cravings and take us maybe off the sugar wagon and take us right to the convenience store to load up on whatever packages of powdered donuts we can find. In some regards, that's not even really us making that rational decision or that choice to go have a sweet treat. That could be, in some ways, we could think of that as just being our gut bugs running the show and driving our cravings. So what we feed more of, the kinds of foods we eat, are going to feed and nurture the kinds of gut bugs that we have. And there's a direct link also with alcohol craving there. A study in Nature Reviews, which is a very highly regarded journal, said, and this is a quote, microbiota changes. So microbiota is that group of gut bugs. Microbiota changes might alter brain function, and the gut-brain axis might be a potential target to reduce alcoholic relapse risk. So if we can shift the population of gut bugs that we're nurturing, we have a potential avenue in there to reduce cravings for alcohol, as well as the other health benefits that come with it. And so the way we do that is through our food choices. We feed the good guys, we feed the healthy gut bacteria with whole grains, legumes and beans, vegetables, and fermented foods like yogurt, sauerkraut, kimchi, tempeh, kefir. So the high fiber plant-based foods are going to feed the happy, healthy gut bugs. And then also the fermented foods actually provide healthy bacteria directly to the gut. So that's your yogurt and sauerkraut. And there's another slide on there. I just included it because I think it's a graphic that gives us kind of a really quick and easy way to see it's called the pathway to anxiety, but we could also see this as the pathway to relapse. We could see this as the pathway to cravings. We could see this as the pathway to depression, because those effects are all very, very similar. And you know, the gut and the foods that we eat there and the kinds of gut bacteria we have, it's going to change the intestinal barrier. The lining of the gut is going to let different kinds of chemicals in and out of our body that then get sent up to the brain. If you add in some stress into the mix, you can start to have a lot of inflammation. There's even a little like, it's not an official diagnosis really, but it's in the research they talk about neuroflammation, meaning that inflammation in the body can actually get into the brain, neuroflammation, and that's very much linked with increased risk of depression. So when we take care of our gut a little bit, we can make huge strides using natural, simple, easy, healthy food to reduce our risk of depression and just feel better. And that makes it a whole lot easier to stay clean and sober, doesn't it, when we actually feel good? So what are some of the we're transitioning now toward the action steps we can take. I do want to point out that gut health that puts us at such risk of cravings, it can be very impacted in active disease. We see that alcohol consumption, I mean, that's basically like pouring a toxic substance down our digestive tract and into our belly. So it's kind of a corrosive substance going in there every day. This is not good for our digestive health and our gut bugs. So alcohol plus the kind of poor diet that we might have when we're choosing booze rather than broccoli, plus the stress that can come from that lifestyle. So we've got all those factors coming in, and the result could be inflammation, leaky gut, changes in our central nervous system circuits, and ultimately it can increase our inability to control that alcohol intake. And it's been linked in the research with increased risk of relapse. Up to 70% of addicts coming into early recovery and treatment centers suffer from at least one nutrient deficiency. And those nutrient deficiencies, besides the impact on the gut health, they just also mean our brains are not getting what they need to build the serotonin, to build the healthy, balanced hormonal profile. We're not getting them if we're not getting the right foods in. 70% of people going into early recovery are going to have at least one nutrient deficiency. And that puts us at risk of depression, low energy, anxiety, agitation, just not feeling good. And that increases our risk of relapse. So the goal then, when we're thinking about using food to reduce cravings, the goal is to heal the gut, restore our hormonal levels, balance our hormones. And this can take several weeks, up to a year or more. It depends on your use profile. It depends on your genetics. And certainly it depends on what you're eating persistently going forward, when we get that gut healing and get the hormonal balance. There's some particular micronutrients that we look at with concern for people coming off substance addictions and alcohol addictions. That would be iron, folate, thiamine, magnesium. Those are all highly likely to be low, and we get a lot of those. We can replete a lot of those from protein foods. Seafood is just one of the highest nutrient foods we could consume. Beans and legumes, nuts and seeds, these are all great healthy protein foods that can help rebalance all of that. I had to put kangaroo in there out of loyalty to my beloved home base here in Australia. Kangaroo is actually a very wonderful and sustainable meat to include if you have access to it. So go get you some kangaroo. Dark leafy greens and whole grains. So the protein foods, dark leafy greens and whole grains, all of them are so nutrient dense that they provide just a wealth of different benefits, including those nutrients of concern. I want to touch briefly also on hydration as we look at things to have more of or how to address that. Dehydration by itself can be mistaken for cravings or just for feeling crap. Sorry to curse, right? But irritation, headache, fatigue, disorientation, difficulty concentrating. In lab trials, we see that as people are dehydrated, their performance just goes down. So, really paying attention, getting enough water in, maybe making some of those beverages, green tea, which is very anti-inflammatory and very protective against cancer. So green tea is awesome. Caution with caffeine, just because for some of us, maybe that jitteriness or anxiety could be provocative. But really the research is clear that for the vast majority of people, including caffeine at the level that your body is able to metabolize it, is really healthy. Having that cup of coffee is going to reduce risk of liver injury and liver cancer. So for people who are really trying to heal their liver after that alcohol particularly, or perhaps hepatitis C, coffee can actually help support that. It reduces risk of type 2 diabetes, reduces risk of Parkinson's disease. Great stuff. But again, that would be more so with a cup of black coffee, not the fancy drink with all the sugar and cream in it. But my favorite study on this showed that up to 14 cups a day of black coffee are protective of liver function. And well, we're in a room of addicts here, so I bet there are some people here who could knock back 14 cups of coffee today with no worries, but I think I'll keep mine around 2 or 3 if I'm feeling wild. And with that cutoff time so I can sleep tonight. So let's look at what else we can eat to tame our cravings. We want some slow release carbohydrates. When our blood sugar starts pinging around, rising and dropping, that can be mistaken for cravings, and it just also creates moodiness and anxiety. So we want nice slow carbs for steady energy, and they also help with the production of serotonin and feed those healthy gut bugs. So we're looking for whole grains, beans and legumes, vegetables, and fruits. Those are all really supportive of having low, slow energy release that's going to take us through the day and nurture our healthy gut bugs and our healing, reduce those cravings. Another option that works for a lot of people in recovery, we're not going to go into it too much right now, but I will do a special hour on it on my Monday evening wellness show. But having a highly plant-based keto diet or a green keto diet, it can be very helpful for many people who are really struggling with food addiction and those sugar cravings. But you still need to be getting in the healthy fibers, and that's a little bit of a balancing act. So I wanted to flag that that's possible, but we'll go into it more later. We want those healthy proteins. Again, they help provide tryptophan, and that can help produce the serotonin. So when we're not getting enough of those neurochemicals, we can have more aggression come up, unstable mood, and increased craving for alcohol and drugs. We also need those healthy proteins for our immunity, our muscle strength. And here's the magic for cravings. Getting more protein in earlier in the day is going to decrease cravings for sugar, decrease cravings for those fast, high sugar, high fat carbs, decrease night eating later in the day. So getting more protein in earlier, healthy, clean proteins earlier in the day is one of the most powerful steps we can take to reduce our cravings later. Caution around way too much protein. We're talking, a good level is going to be around 1 gram per kilogram body weight for most of us. That's a rule of thumb we could start with. And contrary to what the mega muscle builders might say, we do not need to, go on an all carnivore diet. Excess protein can actually strain the liver. And for some of us, that might be a real concern, that liver health. So our healthy proteins we're looking for are the beans and legumes, nuts and seeds, eggs, fish and seafood, tofu, dairy, and some poultry and meats, although the research is pretty clear that more plant-based proteins are going to be more supportive of health on a myriad of levels. And I have a great protein handout, so we'll give my contact information at the end, but it's lulu@gutfeelingcoaching.com. If any of you want a handout on that, you can email me and I can get that to you. So looking at fats then, we've talked about getting in some good slow carbs. We've been getting in some great plant-based proteins. We're going to go for some plant-based fats next. The fats are going to have a big impact on our inflammation levels and our neuroinflammation levels in our brain. And so the animal-based fats, the saturated fats, are linked with both poor gut health and increased inflammation all over the body. I love butter, so this is very, very sad news for me to have to share with you. Really, we want our staple cooking oil to be olive oil, not butter. We still get a little bit of butter just for the scrumptious goodness every now and then, but we really want to shift away from more of those animal-based fats to more of the delicious plant-based fats, avocado, nuts and seeds, again, that extra virgin olive oil. Dark chocolate, there is good news here, people. Dark chocolate can count as a plant-based fat, and what that's going to do is help reduce the inflammation, particularly fats that are a source of omega-3 fatty acids. Part of our brain structure relies directly on omega-3 fatty acids, and having enough of these kinds of fats can reduce inflammation overall, ensure that good brain structure, which we need if we want to keep those cravings in check, right? So lower risk of depression and anxiety also possibly with omega-3 fatty acids. We're going to get those from fatty fish like salmon, but also walnuts, flax seeds, hemp seeds. So those are some of the slow carbs, healthy proteins, and plant-based fats we want to really focus on. Other practical tips, keeping in mind HALT, H-A-L-T, hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. Especially if we're really struggling with the cravings or we're early in recovery, don't get too hungry. Eat early, eat often. Make it high nutrient foods first. Rather than beating ourselves up about what we're not going to eat, I don't get to eat my favorite lemon pie. Reframe. Let's look at what we do get to eat first. Getting in a ton of good, healthy protein, getting in half of our plate filled with vegetables. Start there. Eat that first. It will reduce your cravings for how much of that lemon pie you can put away. Guaranteed. So we don't have to restrict, we don't have to deprive, but let's just focus on getting more of that healthy stuff in first. Focus on healing your gut. And think about including some mindfulness, mindful eating. There's a ton of research showing that mindfulness practices reduce craving and reduce acting out on craving, whether that's substances or food and sugar type substances. So really great place to practice. Some of us who have trauma histories, that mindfulness practices need to be really carefully selected and carefully used. And it might be a great place to get some support from someone who can give guidance on that. Some of us are going to be fine just downloading an app and practicing some mindfulness and mindful eating that way. Some of us will find it much, much more challenging, and you don't have to make yourself meditate through something that's really emotionally and psychologically provocative for you. That can actually be damaging. But I have never met anyone who can't find a way to practice mindful awareness that feels good for them. So good place to get some help to be able to use that tool to differentiate our cravings better. Is it really alcohol I'm craving? Is it really cookies I'm craving? Or is maybe there an emotional hunger underneath that? Mindfulness can really help us clarify that. And so we could pull in our allies, whether that's professional assistance with somebody qualified. And, that's me. That's what I do. So I have strong opinions about qualifications. But it might not be. It could just be your sponsor with particular challenges. Some of us will use the OA program, a beautiful option for some people. And just like-minded friends. We know that health behaviors travel together. So if you're hanging out with people who are like, hey, let's go for a walk as a way to bond. Some of us are starting to see our restrictions ease up, and we really could get together with one friend or a small group of friends and go for a walk together. Those are the kind of people we want in our lives who are going to really help us amplify our healthy, good intentions. Sleep for at least 7 hours. We see that cravings, and specifically cravings for carbs, get elevated if we don't get enough sleep. Appetite, metabolism, they all go in the wrong direction when we don't get enough sleep, so sleep more. And yeah. Oh, I'm wanting to leave some time for questions, but I just have so much good information to share, so I know I'm talking a mile a minute. I see you, Tammy.
You do. You have tons of great questions. So a couple of things. Lulu's contact information is on the slide. So at the top, Nutrition to Fight Cravings. Click on that, download it, and her slides are there. She's on Monday nights. But let's see how many of these you can answer in the time we have remaining. Okay.
I talk fast.
I know you do, but it's been fabulous. Okay. I won't even comment. Can we have lab testing that measures hormone levels? Or are these temporary hormone fluctuations? And then I've got another question for you after that. Go ahead.
Yeah, the lab testing that you would typically do, certainly the saliva hormone testing, not persuasively connected with giving a meaningful picture of overall hormone values. It's definitely that single snap in time, and the quality control on a lot of those kits that you really could do at home, the quality control is dodgy, so the information may not even be accurate to what it says it is. And then on top of that, there's no persuasive evidence yet that the information you would get from those tests offers meaningful feedback to certainly dietary changes that you might make. Yeah, it can get a little bit more complex than that. Potentially, if you're going through your doctor, you might get some information that would be really useful. But the bottom line suggestion, the bottom line nutrition fundamentals are not going to change no matter what hormone test you take.
What about nutrition, nutrient deficiencies? Because you said a lot of people have nutrient deficiencies. Is there testing for that?
Yeah, some of them we have good tests for, and easy and affordable tests for. Some of them we don't. I'll pick iron, for example, which many women of childbearing age, they'll be iron deficient. That is just quick, easily available test that a doctor would instantly tick on that blood test form, and, very highly available. Other nutrient deficiencies are harder to test for, or more expensive, or you're going to have a harder time getting a mainstream doctor to prescribe that test. And sometimes that is probably because some of the tests that we think might be useful are just not well validated. And then sometimes it really might be because there might be a nutrient deficiency test that would have meaningful information for you, but there might not be a great place to have it, or it might be considered a little bit more fringe. So, that would be a personal or individual answer per each nutrient. But for sure, some of the really common nutrient deficiencies, B12, iron, those are really easy and easily available to test for. Some of the more niche ones are going to be harder to find an accurate and affordable test for.
What about keto? Because you're talking about, because it says, why are keto people promoting high fat foods? So what is your, because we're talking about fats, and so why would keto be good or bad or whatever?
Yeah. So as I said a little bit ago, we'll do a whole hour on that on an upcoming Monday, because there's so much there. Keto, which is a very low carb diet, moderate protein, high fat. But the main thing is that you have to keep the carbs under a certain level, and it's got a lot of neurological effect, that kind of dietary pattern does, and it really does seem to reduce cravings and increase satiety, increase that sense of fullness from foods. So can be a great tool to use toward any kind of food addiction or craving kind of scenario. On the flip side, it's easy to do it in ways that are not particularly healthful. If we're relying entirely on bacon and butter, as our diet, we are getting a lot of that saturated fat. The research is mixed on the impact of that in a keto diet. It's possibly not great for our gut bugs. Generally, the healthy gut bugs do not thrive on saturated fats. The unhealthy gut bugs do. So I'm a real proponent of a well-planned, highly plant-based keto diet. It wouldn't have to be entirely plant-based, but you're really wanting to look, you have to get enough vegetables in there for a keto diet to be actually a balanced and healthful nutrition profile, sort of as a long-term solution. And with that, if you are doing that, if it's a carefully planned, balanced, plant-based keto diet, there can be a lot of health benefits. There's also a lot of scientific questions still to be answered, because we know in general those high-fat diets, bad for the gut, bad for inflammation, bad for the heart. And it's still getting teased out in the data.
Next question. What relation, if any, does sugar have to depression?
So ton of connection, some of it being through that impact on the gut populations. That high sugar diet is going to impact the gut populations in a way that is not healthful. So our serotonin levels can go down. We have less production of serotonin, which we need for a stable, sunny, balanced mood. Sugar is inflammatory. So just consuming that sugar right off the bat raises our inflammation levels, and then that's linked with the neuroinflammation. Once we start maybe putting on more weight than is a healthy range for us through potentially that high sugar intake, then we start getting some hormonal dysregulation coming from the fat cells and the kinds of hormones that they're active with. So having a high sugar diet is clearly linked with increasing risk of depression, and having taking the sugar out of the diet is a frontline move to reduce depression risk.
Here's a good one. What's the easiest way to assess your current gut health?
How is your poop? Is a great place to start.
Well, I need to know. Tell me more.
Well, so you're looking, one of the most obvious places is just going to be if your toilet habits feel comfortable and easy. So you're relatively regular, you're relatively consistent, and you're not experiencing a ton of bloating or pain and cramping in regards to your toilet habits each day. So typically in that regard, if it's not working or if you're straining too much. We know if that's not working, and that's definitely a sign that our gut isn't going well. I will say with the bloating, eating a highly plant-based diet when you consume that much bulk, that big salad, for instance, you can have that sense of a little bit of bloating right afterwards because you've just put a big bunch of bulk in your belly. So that's going to get digested, and that's not actually a problem. It's not weight gain. It's perfectly healthy, natural part of a functioning human body. But it's just using what's my comfort level. And you can also certainly look at your ongoing energy through the day and your ongoing sort of mood status through the day. And you can look at how well you're sleeping. Those are all clues to your gut health.
Great answer. I have a quick question on that, because you did not mention like the probiotic pills. Do you have any thoughts on those?
Absolutely. So yes, food first is my first thought. I know some of us in this room might have a little bit of that quick fix kind of mentality. I don't want to eat a healthier diet. I just want to take a pill. Thank you very much. So I always say food first. So getting those high fiber beans and whole grains and vegetables in there, getting the fermented foods, the yogurt and sauerkraut in there, that's your frontline move. And then from there, you might look at supplementation, adding some probiotic supplements. I think I've got some good information on that on my website, kind of some guidance around how you might choose it. It doesn't, for many of us who are in a pretty good health condition, we don't necessarily need the super expensive high-end probiotics. There's a lot of marketing and hype out there around probiotics and supplements in general. It's a poorly regulated industry, and I just really encourage a lot of caution around which supplements we choose to purchase and consume and which we don't. We spend a lot of money on supplements that aren't doing anything. And that said, they can play a helpful role. So it's a place to get a little bit more education, or call in someone like me who's done the research and can help weed your way through, so that you're spending money on supplements that are doing what you think they're doing, and that's helpful.
This is a great question, and I can so relate to this too. I tend to eat a whole cake or eat a whole box of cookies at one sitting. Is this linked to my alcoholism?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I would absolutely say that for many of us, there would be that link there. There's that genetic link. There's the fact that alcohol, many of the types of alcohol we might be consuming regularly, like a beer or a wine, those are actually, they've got quite a bit of sugar in them. And so again, you're feeding certain gut bugs who are going to have that preference. And so then if we stop with the drinking, besides all the genetic links, besides all the neurobiological links, we stop the alcohol, and now we've got some gut bugs in there who are pretty hungry they want their sugar back. So if we're able to stay strong with our abstinence and we're not going to pick up the bottle, we might end up picking up the pie instead. And this is 100% manageable. We can make those dietary shifts over time that are going to soothe that whole system down and heal that system, so that we're just in a much stronger place and have just really reduced that risk of falling into the craving and falling into that box of cookies. Recovery is possible. But just like working our program, maybe you could say, just like working through our 12 steps, it's not a one and done thing. Some of us have that experience. We show up in the rooms for the first time and we never leave. We never relapse. And that's awesome. Others of us are going to have that experience of on again, off again, on again, off again before it finally sticks. It can be like that with our dietary changes as well. Most of us, it's not going to be, I'm going to eat a brand new diet of everything tomorrow and for the rest of my life. That won't be most of our experience, but there are so many places we can start taking those steps, making those positive changes, just working our way through one change at a time, one step at a time, and discovering, I'm feeling better. I feel good. I haven't gone for that whole box of cookies in a while. Something's changing. And just like with being clean and sober, sometimes it can be kind of subtle, but if we stick with it over time, like you have those moments where you're like, wow, I have not thought about picking up a drink in X amount of time. I never thought I could go a day without it. And now I haven't thought about it in how long, and I feel great. We can have that same transformation with our physical and mental health as well when we are really committed to making these changes over time.
I think that's such a perfect place. There's a number of questions. We won't get to them. But so if you did not get to download Lulu's slides, they're there, Nutrition to Fight Cravings. But you can also email her at lulu@gutfeelingcoaching.com. Her website is gutfeelingnutritiontherapy.com. But you can also find her right here in the rooms on Monday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern time. This has been so useful and so helpful, even though I've been around a few 24 hours, food and sugar. I mean, there's always more to know. And, I think it's always one of those, we can support our recovery by making just a few choices. I did want to comment too, because you talked about, I don't get to, eat that whole cake or whatever. I had to learn to reframe it for myself of like, instead of it being a deprivation thing, if I'm going to choose better for myself today, so I'm going to eat the broccoli or I'm going to eat the carrots and hummus rather than the cake or whatever, so, and just finding that balance. So thank you again for this. Thank you to In the Rooms for creating this space. And thank you to Seeking Integrity for the collaboration. So please keep joining us again, June 20th. Lulu, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I see I've got some chats and messages down in my box there, so I will be hanging on. And answering those. I'll be on Monday evening. We're talking about perimenopause this week. Guys, stick with us. It's not always, it's a different topic each week, so your turn will come. But this week we're talking about radiant menopause and how to feel great going through the change, even in the midst of recovery and COVID and everything. So hope to see some of you there. And pop me a note here or at my email, and we can keep the conversation going so we can keep feeling happy, healthy, and high energy in our recovery.